Hi everyone, and welcome back to our next lesson. And in this lesson what we will be discussing is CSS selectors. As you guys can remember from the previous video in our style sheet, this is our selector and this is our declaration. You can see right here. So this part right here is our selectors, and this part right here between the curly braces is your declaration. But before we get into that, there's a couple of different types of selectors that you can use in CSS, which makes it very handy and easy to understand. So let's start with the first one. Let's put a paragraph tag just for ease of reference. So this will be, we have a, let's do like this. Let's do it like this. We've got a B, let's put in a section, is what we have learned before. And we're going to just rename this to simple selector. So this is our first selector. We have simple selectors. Now simple selectors get used either through the name, this part right here, that's the name, or we can use it through a class, or we can use them through the IDs. Now, how do they look like in CSS? So let's start with that one, or we could use the, let me just put it like the universal selector. I will show you now what that looks like as well. So let's start off with the name. So the name we have already seen right there. Now let's change it to the class. Now with the class notation, what we do is we use the dot, full stop, or point, whatever you want to call it. So we use that. So let's quickly put a class right here. Let's say this is a class of section. Kind of very generic, but we're just going to put that as a class of section. So we put in there section. Let's not confuse you guys. Let's change it to something else, because that is kind of conflicting with that one there. Let's change it to box. Let's change it to box. So we select the class with box. So as you can see, the dot notation, and then we do our declaration. Now let's give this a background color of yeah, it's very dark. So let's just give it a background color. So as you can see, this is a simple declaration with a class notation of that. All right. Now let's change another one and give this one an ID. ID, no, not the class. We give it an ID of title. All right. So let's change it here, and in our CSS style sheet we change it hash. We use the hash symbol to kind of get the ID. So if we go there, ID of title, and then we do our declaration, and we can just say color. Now the color notation, what it does, it's for the font, but we're gonna explain all the kind of properties a little bit later. So we have our color there. Let's change it to something kind of noticeable. Let's change it to gray, because I want to change it to any color I want. So let's make it a little bit orangey. Go for that color. So as you can see, we got our class notation with a dot, and we got our ID notation with a hash symbol, which everyone knows nowadays because of Twitter. All the social media stuff. All right, let's go back to our index. As you can see, we got our name, which is just a normal one. You don't put any notations in front of the name. Right there, it selects it as is. You don't put any you don't put a symbol or anything in front of it. Then we have our class notation. Then we go over here. Then we can see our class right there. Then we got our ID. We've got our ID right here with a hash symbol. All right, and then we have our universal selector. Now you might be wondering, why do we need a universal selector? Now the universal selector on your numpad, you will see this symbol. Now that symbol right there is your universal. It selects every element in your document. Now we can, normally what I use it for, if I want to give like a more control over myself, what I want to decide over the margins, the padding, and the box sizing. So for us, we want to change the universal. As you can see, let's quickly go to our browser. Let's just save this. Now, as you can see, we are in our browser right now. If you can remember from the previous video, we opened our DevTools. Let me just make it a little bit bigger for you guys again. We got our DevTools right here. Now, if we click on the inspector, you can see it right there. Now, if I hover my mouse, as you can see, we got a default padding margin, the yellow ones, if you can see right there. So right now I'm hovering over the body. Now the body is a default padding of, let's see if we go to layout right here, we go to layout, you can see our box model, which we will discuss in another video. As you can see, it's got margin of 8 pixels right around. Now, I normally don't want that when I do my designing. I kind of want to give my own styles, my own things to all the properties that I work with. So as you can see, our H1 has got a default margin of top and bottom. And as you can see, everything has its own margin. That's our default value. But what if we want to change the default value not to have those kind of things, and we want more control over them? All right, now let's go back to our VS Code. What we do right here is we're going to change the margin. We put it to 0. We don't want any margin, and we don't want any padding. We put it to 0 as well. All right, now let's quickly go back to our browser, and then you will see. Now, as you can see, if we click right here, let's click on that. You can see our selector comes up here, the universal selector, and it puts all our margins to 0. As you can see in our layout right there, there's nothing. There's 0, 0, 0, and our paddings are 0. So as you can see, the default styles of the margin and padding is completely been removed. And if you can see right there, everything has been removed. So it kind of gives me more freedom in order to put my own style sheets and padding and default stuff in my document as well. Right, this will be a little bit of a long video, so bear with me, because I remember when I first learned this stuff, some things I just needed to be explained to just kind of a little bit more detail. Now let's just use a name selector as well. Let's say our body. Now this part right here, we saw it. And this is our name part right there. So our body part right there. And we change, let's say we want to change the background color. Or let's say we want to just give it padding. Give it our own padding. So we type in padding. And we're going to say we need to give it 15 pixels right around. Okay, so let's save that. Now, as you can see in our Firefox browser, if I click on there, you can see the padding has been given right around. I normally don't do this kind of styling, but I just want to show you it gives us now the freedom to put whatever we want on that padding right there, or margins, or whatever you want to do there. All right. So if you can see, The padding is the inner part of your document. The margins is the outer part, but we will discuss the box model just, I think, in the next video. We need to do that. Okay, so we will discuss this box model in more detail. Right, let's continue to other selectors as well. Let's go back to VS Code. But before we continue, I just want to show you guys something. You can also have a grouping selector, which is part of the simple selectors. So we can say our H1 and our P tags right there. So we can group them like this. So we can say H1, P, and we can say padding. Or let's say margin. Let's give it a margin. And we want to give it a margin top. Give it a margin left. Margin right. For us, we can say margin bottom of, let's say, 10 pixels. Right. So as you can see, you can also do a grouping. So what this does is it will, all the elements that you have, you can group them if you want to style them the same. Let's say you've got H1, and for us, we're going to do the H2, and we're going to do the paragraph tag, and we want to give all of them a padding of 10 pixels. You can do that as well. All right. So let's move on to our next selector. Right, let's create a section. And let's put in an H2 again. But we're going to put now ID, and we're going to call this Combinator Selector. I hope I'm spelling it right. Let me just make sure of my spelling. All right, looks good. But I'm just going to Combinator Selector, and then we're going to put P class right there. All right, now what is Combinator Selectors? Now the first one that we have in our Combinator Selectors, let me just make sure you guys know that this is on its own section, and that's a section on its own. Let's give this one an ID. ID of second. So you guys know how that works. We just remove that. We're just going to put an ID of second. Alright, so what we're going to do, we got the first one is descendant selector. Descendant selector. Next one that we have is we got the, just typing it like this for easy, to see it easy. So child selector. And then we have the adjacent selector. Let me just quickly type them all out. All right. So what we have is we've got the descendant selector. Then we've got a child selector. Then we've got the adjacent sibling selector. And then we've got the general sibling selector. Now you might be wondering, wow, this looks a little bit confusing. But let's start off with the first one, the descendant selector. You will most probably going to use this one a lot. So let me quickly show you how that works. Let's go to CSS, to our style sheet right here. And let's say because this is where we are now, so we're going to use the ID of second. So how do we use the ID again? So we put hash, and then we type in second. Now, as you can see, I'm putting a space right there. All right. So the descendant selector, so it will be the one directly underneath it right there. Or this one right here. So what we can do is we're going to direct descendant of second is the H2 or the P. Our paragraph tag right there. It's a direct descendant. So if you can ever look right here, as you can see, they're kind of on its own line right there. That of the second, the H2 is the direct descendant, and the P is also descendant of that as well. So let's quickly go to our H2, and then you can obviously style it right there. So this one is the first one, and then the descendant is the H2 or the P. Right. So with a lot of the repetition and stuff like that, you kind of get used to how to do that as well. So for us, let me just do the H2 and just say color blue. Just want to use it for something, or you can do the second, and you can do the paragraph tag and give it a color of let's give it like this, and I just want to change the color, maybe to a pinkish color right there. Right, let's save it. And in order to give a comment, we can just type like this. Press, let me just do this. You press Control plus this symbol. Okay. Then you can create a comment in your CSS. Now it will be grayed out like this. And then you can type in here, obviously, the adjacent. My bad. The descendant selector space. So this is how that looks like. Now the next one, so otherwise this video will be way too long, is the child selector. Right? Let's quickly do that. Now let's say what we're going to do is let's create a div quickly. And then we have a p tag right there. Create a div. 3 other h3 p tag right there. So let's put in h3. We're going to say this is 1, this is 2, this is 3, and put another div just to kind of show you guys quickly. Now div went in h3, and let's make it 3. Sorry, make this 3, and we make this p1. All right. So now we want to do is we want to the child selector. So let's go here. Let's give this a class of 1, just to make it easy for us. So now what we're going to do is the child selector. Copy and paste this quickly. Let's do this. Copy that. Paste it in here. Now a child selector, what you can do is you type in, we got a class of 1. And then directly underneath it, with all the children, basically, of the 1 is the h3 that we're looking for, and we want to make the font size something ridiculous. Let's make it very big. So it's a 40 pixels. This is going to be very big. So, and we're going to give it a background color. Or let's say, one video gets too long, so I kind of want to speed it up a bit. But you know what? This is a 40-minute video, so be it. I just want to kind of give you guys all the information. Otherwise, I'm skipping over things that you guys can learn. So let's go back to our Firefox browser or whatever browser you're using. As you can see, all the children, as you can see the paragraph right here, it didn't select it. It selected all the children of the H2. How nice is that? It selected all of them and give them this ridiculously big headings right there. And as you can see right here, we have our paragraph tag right there that wasn't selected because it wasn't in H3. It's very, very, very useful. All right. So let's, as you can see, there's a combinator selector, and this is obviously the ones that we changed the things to, but this is the one that we had now. Let's go on to the next one. Now, let's quickly show you guys how this one works. So I kind of want to get rid of the top ones now, so otherwise it gets too busy. So let's leave it on second, and we have our one right here, and it's a paragraph tag of, I'm just going to put lorem 10. Now this is emit lorem ipsum. Just give us some dummy text, and then we're going to put just an H2. Let's put an H2 heading, and instead of class, we're just going to do this div, and we put a div right here again with a paragraph. Then we're going to put just dummy text of 20. Then we're going to put an H3. I'm just using this as an example. H3 heading. And let's put another div. Paragraph tag. Lorem 50. Let's just give us dummy tags of 50. And then straight underneath that, we're going to put an H2 again. And H2 heading. Now let's quickly go to our Firefox or whatever browser that we're using. Let's quickly see how this looks like. Now, as you can see, we have our H2 heading with a paragraph tag, H3 heading with a div with the paragraphs as well. Then we're going to H2. Now, this is I'll quickly show you how this works. Let's go to our CSS style sheet. Now, a JSON sibling selected. So as you can see, we have our div right here, and then we got our its sibling right there. So this div, its sibling is here, and this div, so this div sibling is H2, and this one sibling. But let's quickly, although I don't want to confuse you guys. So let's do the div and its first sibling. So what we're going to do, is just going to do plus, then we're going to say H2. So the div, the adjacent sibling of the div, okay, is the H2 that we're looking for, and we're going to give it a background color of, let's say we want something that stands out. So like goldish, black gold color. So let's see how this looks like in our web browser. And voila, as you can see, it selected the adjacent sibling. Only styled it. As you can see, it didn't. So this is our div, and this was its sibling H2, and this is another div, this is an H3, and this is another div that we had with a paragraph tag, and this is the H2. So that's how you can select all your siblings of the div or whatever element you have and just kind of style it that way. So the next one is the general sibling selector. So let's do that quickly. All right, and in this video, this part, sorry, and in this part what we will do is we need to add, let's quickly add the general sibling selector. So now what this does is, let's say we go to our section, and then we want to say all siblings. That's all the divs that's a sibling of section. We want to give a background color of gray, and we want to give it a padding of 20 pixels just to make it stand out a bit. So let's quickly see how that looks like. We go into our index. You can see this is a section, and this div is a sibling of that section. Then I created another section, but it doesn't have a div as a sibling. So technically, this is the only one that needs to, this one and this one, they needed to be their color. So let's quickly see how that looks like. And voila! We have our, see, this is the section, and this is the div, and this is the div as well. So yep, all the divs under that section, they are given their background color. All right, so that's the general sibling. So let's quickly go back. So as you can see, this was the section, and this is the general sibling, and this one was the general sibling. So this is another section, but this is a sibling of that section, but it didn't get highlighted because it wasn't a div. But under this section, if I put it another div right here, so let's put another div right there, and let's copy this one instead of doing everything again. All right, so let's do that and go back to 5 or whatever browser you're using. As you can see, it's highlighted again because this was the one section and this is the div straight underneath it. All right, this will be a 2-part or 3-part. So this is the part 1 of the selector, because there's still more selectors that we need to discuss. So if you, otherwise the video will get way too long, and people don't like very long videos on YouTube. So let me pause it for here for now, and if you do like the video, please give it a like. If you dislike the video, dislike it for us, and in the comment section, please give us a constructive feedback. We'd really appreciate it in order to improve these videos. I didn't want to leave anything out, is I kind of, when I want to learn all the things that's needed for a topic or subject or something like that. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you guys in the next part. Cheers.